Greetings, everyone. I am incredibly honored today to be in conversation with Richard Tarnas, who's had a profound impact on my life across the last 30 years. But let me briefly introduce you and then we'll get into our conversation together. But thank you for doing this today.
Oh, it's my honor. Thank you very much, Heather.
So, Richard is a brilliant cultural historian and archetypal astrologer. He's Professor Emeritus at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where he was the founding director of the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness Department. He also frequently lectured at Pacifica Graduate Institute and was formerly director of programs and education at Esalen Institute. He is the author of The Passion of the Western Mind, as well as Cosmos and Psyche and Prometheus, the Awakener. I loved that book. Truly, Rick, you are one of the most integrative scholars and thinkers that I know in terms of your weaving together the history of ideas, depth psychology, the evolution of consciousness, archetypal cosmology, philosophy, and spirituality. So thank you for the work that you've done and how you bring such insight into where we are in our journey individually and collectively now in our evolution of consciousness.
Yep, I was just thanking you for the very kind way that you put that. And yeah, we're all striving to do what we can, contribute what we can to this really dramatic moment in our species and civilization's history, as well as our nation here and the planet.
Let's talk some about that because you talk in the Cosmos and Psyche, you've talked in recent lectures that I've heard you give about how this is such a critical time in our history and that it's a liminal time and a crisis point where we really are in a crisis of meaning and how we view ourselves and view our relationship with the earth and the cosmos. Can you talk more about your sense of that?
Yes. Well, like many other people, for a long time, I've been convinced that the the kind of multi-crisis that our world is facing right now, bottom line, is a crisis of vision. It's a crisis of understanding of the, and really it's of our civilization's worldview that has had such a dominant effect on how we relate to each other. And when I say relate to each other, I want to include relate to each other, other species, and all the other forms of life on this planet. The planet as the Earth, the cosmos itself, all of these. There's been a tendency in the modern world over the last, say, 300-400 years in particular, to carry a kind of view of the rest of nature, be outside of the human being, as being, in some sense, an object, while we are a subject, as if we're the great, intelligent, spiritually aspiring uh, beings on the planet that have purpose and a capacity for meaning, and that the rest of everything else around us, including the cosmos itself, is somehow intrinsically without meaning, without purpose. It's we who bring in meaning and purpose completely on our own. Uh, and the conviction is that basically the cosmos and the earth without the human being is soulless, and that it lacks a capacity for uh, intelligence, purpose, etc. And that's gotten us into a great deal of trouble, because when you have a powerful objectifying attitude uh, towards another person or towards any other being, that will shape the relationship that unfolds. It will shape how that other person or how the rest of nature responds to us. And there, if always one is looking to, for example, looking at forests and other animals and mountains and so forth as being nothing but potential exploitable objects to enhance our well-being, um, there's going to be a certain point where that um, that moves comes back at us like a boomerang, and that eventually, of course, that objectifying attitude starts being put against ourselves as well, and against each other, but also at a deep level, a kind of soullessness starts to creep into our own way of being, and that that's been both a tremendous spiritual impoverishment, and for a long time, that's what people were concerned about, is that this mechanistic, objectifying um, approach that was part of the modern worldview was cutting off the soul and making us spiritually impoverished. But, and that's certainly true, but it also is not, it's now become more of a biological emergency. It's become an ecological emergency. It's not just a kind of matter of our psycho-spiritual condition. It's the matter of it's a matter of our future existence, as well as the many species around us that are endangered or being made extinct by us, and so forth. So the assumptions of modernity, and those of you who know my work, I mean, you are, and those who are listening to us who know my work, know that I try to be as faithful to the complexities and the paradoxes and so forth that exist in what we're talking about. But um, the, for all the nobility that is also part of the modern project and the modern self, there is also a shadow side of it that has moral consequences. Um, the assumption that we are the only meaning and purpose carrying beings that we have to uh, include in our circle of moral concern is a moral act with consequences that not only involve our, our moral being and relationship to the whole, but as I'm also trying to convey, as Gregory Bateson said, if if you look upon um, nature in this way, uh, and you have a powerful technology, then your chances of survival as a species are a snowball in hell. This is Gregory Bateson, the great anthropologist and biologist, but also he had a sharp wit, and he's one of my teachers there at Esalen Institute many years ago, half a century ago, and he really put his finger on it, on the situation. I mean, it's like a sorcerer's apprentice, where there's more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our um, limited modern mechanistic philosophy. And if you don't take those into account, then we're like the sorcerer's apprentice that is exerting powerful, considerable, like technological, cognitive power that is going to set in motion things as is happening with climate change and so forth, that we weren't prepared for because we've been not taking into account the larger spectrum of reality that is operative.
So well said. And Bateson's quote reminds me of Elizabeth Satorus's work. I don't know if you know her work,
Sure.
the
Yeah, I
evolutionary
know Elizabeth,
biologist.
or I knew her. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, dear friend, who talks about how other species in their path of growth and maturity learn that you have to move beyond survival of the fittest into that understanding that you only thrive through interdependence and interconnectedness. But we as humanity are still functioning at a very immature level and
yes,
caught in that survival of the fittest mentality. But
yeah,
also, you talk a lot about historically, we've come through this journey that maybe began from my perspective, in the age of Aries around 4,000 years ago, when we started moving into this sense of ourselves as separate and this path that eventually culminated in depth psychology and this understanding of our individuation process that now is has gotten us caught in the illusion of our separation and that we need to come back, as you're saying, to that understanding that everything is sacred, everything is interconnected, so that we don't spin more and more out of balance, not only destroying the earth, but threatening to destroy ourselves.
yes. I mean, the thing I'd add to that is that we the I don't believe that this process of of a kind of gradual and then radical differentiation of the human self out of the matrix of the whole. I don't believe that it has only been like a wrong turn or a pathological process or like one big evolutionary error. Rather, I think as you use the word individuation, and there's there's both the conventional understanding of individuation, which is that we separate from the crowd and we become an individual, making our own decisions and so forth. But then Jung brought up a more profound understanding of individuation, which is that um, it's a longer process that also involves a kind of descent as well as an ascent, and that at a certain point there is a kind of dying to a an old identity that and a kind of reconnecting with the depths within us, but the depths of the whole, uh, out of which we have emerged and with which we continue to be deeply interconnected, so that individuation is simultaneously a matter of becoming ourselves in a differentiated way, but it's also a reconnection with the great universal archetypal powers. So the energy, the deep numinous energies of death and rebirth, for example, that are within us all, and a reconnection to the whole. The metaphor I often use, or the analogy, is you the tendency in the modern conception of the individual is to kind of think of us all as being these, well, a kind of like a Cartesian bubble, or the skin encapsulated ego, as Alan Watts put it, or in part, the metaphor I would also use would be like we're each plants in a pot, we're potted plants. But Jung's point, uh, and the one I'm wanting to elaborate, is the extent to which, in fact, we're all planted in the earth. We share that great ground of being inside us, the depths, the not just the earth literally are we expressions of reach the earth in the form of Heather, of Rick, of whoever one is, but we are also deeply um, continuous with and informed by and enriched by the anima mundi, the soul of the world. So it's not only a kind of biological evolutionary reality and a geological biological evolutionary reality that we are the cosmos, we are the earth in human form and in our individual form as Heather Ensworth or Richard Tarnas, etc. But we are also um, uh, in a profound spiritual sense, an expression of the 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 spirit and soul of the whole of the cosmos, and that our soul, our spirit, is not um, just a human property, and and it's not just my property, but in that I am ultimately a flowering, and you and each of us is a flowering out of the universal, out of the collective, out of the whole, the matrix of the whole. And you can think of it in solar and lunar terms. I mean, the solar is, of course, the great single light in the sky that when it's so brilliant, and it's like the hero archetype. At dawn, it conquers the darkness and it goes on its journey. And when the sun shines, that's what's happening. I mean, it's the greatest light in the heavens. You can't see the rest of the sky except the sun is so dominant, but it also brings tremendous clarity and differentiation of things, and it reveals the day world. The sun is the ruler of the day, but the moon is the ruler of the night. And uh, and when the moon shines as it is now within the in this full moon period of the month, um, you can still see the deep sky. You can see the other stars, and through the whole lunar cycle, you can see the many other stars, the many other suns, and you get a sense of the whole and of the plurality of the whole, and you also get a sense of the depth, deep space, not the shallower atmosphere that is in the day. So if you think of the moon as the ruler of the night, is in some sense the great embodiment of the whole. It's the connected to the great mother goddess, to the matrix of being, while the solar individual part of us is on its journey and is what we are more conscious of identifying with. But the moon is who we are in a deep sort of psychosomatic sense, as a foundation of our being. And it also, in some sense, represents the whole. And individuation is something that takes place through the sacred marriage of the solar and the lunar, uh, uh, which can also be seen as a um, conjunctio oppositorum. The hieros gamos is the Greek term for the sacred marriage, and that's the marriage of the part and the whole of the individual that is ultimately in dialogical wholeness with the entire matrix of being. Okay, so getting back to the idea that roughly 4,000 years ago, there was this kind of gradual um, uh, evolution towards an increasing separation of the human being from the whole, from nature, from the sacredness of nature, etc. And a lot of this was especially catalyzed during the axial era of the first millennium BCE, when simultaneously in ancient Israel, ancient Greece, ancient India, ancient China, there was this rising of like Buddhism, and the new understanding of deity that came through the Hebrew prophets, like Isaiah, both Isaiahs and the Ezekiel and so forth, or in Greece through Pythagoras and Plato and the Buddha and Confucius in China and so forth. And all of these had created there at that point there was this revelation of a higher domain of being, a transcendent domain of being, of perfection, eternity, uh, um, light, uh, divinity, while this world was seen as being, in some radical sense, either well, inferior to the transcendent, um, an emanation of the transcendent, or a poor imitation of it, as would be one interpretation of the Platonic understanding coming out of ancient Greece. But the God was the ultimate, but he created this world that is an expression of his, often it's a masculine rendering of the transcendent, and the, the earth, this world, the immanent, is often seen as feminine, like the sublunary versus the solar celestial realms, and and that can set up a kind of dualism that depreciates this world in favor of the transcendent, um, the one over the many, for example, perfection over the imperfections of life, uh, eternity over the cycles of di dying and being reborn, etc. And so, and then it can get very extreme in certain, like Gnostic, Manichaean, certain medieval Christian forms that can become like this. This is a fallen world
Yeah.
that is ruled by the Prince of Darkness, um, etc. So that, but then there was this gradual, what modernity comes out of the medieval period and comes partly as a result of a gradual, um, what we would psychologically, psychoanalytically call an introjection of the transcendent, where just as man is made in the image of God, or the human being is made in the image of the divine, and that is carried in all of these different axial religious and philosophical traditions, some form of that sense that the human being has a special relationship to this divine transcendent, and either through philosophical illumination or religious uh, uh, enlightenment, um, through the achieving of wisdom, uh, through mystical awakening, there is the human being can become one with this transcendent divinity, above and beyond this world of the rest of nature, the world of dying and change, etc., into this changeless, eternal perfection. And so you can see the human being in the modern context as being, in some sense, we've become the transcendent being in an immanent world, and we inherited that. We inherited that sense of that we get out of the Bible, for example, the Genesis, the sense of how God is separate from the world that he creates, and he's superior to it, and he's radically different from it. And that's all true about the human being. In the modern understanding, we are separate from, superior to, because of our intelligence and so forth, and our consciousness, highly developed, and we're radically different from that which is not human. And now we're having to go through a dying of that identity, but at the same time, Buddhism Christianity, Judaism, Confucianism, these all gave us incredible gifts in terms of our um, individual moral self-awareness and self-responsibility, the impulse towards universal human compassion, for example, in agape in Christianity, or the loving kindness that is taught within the Buddhist tradition and so forth. So I think I've gone on a little long here, but just to wrap this thing up, what I'm trying to convey is this paradox of how that big process of, yes, there was a kind of fall, there was a kind of separation from the divine unity uh, uh, that occurred gradually, really, over the millennia, um, but that permitted certain new capacities to be developed. At the same time, it created new shadows, new um, temptations, and to which the all too human being has succumbed. And uh, I think the great challenge of our time is to retain and evolve those precious gifts that we have taken from these last several thousand years and several hundred years of our evolution, our spiritual evolution, intellectual, psychological, at the same time as recognizing what we have left out, what we have wronged, what we have uh, eclipsed out of our bright consciousness. And
Yeah.
so that there can be, as a result of this, in a way, a kind of remorse and grieving for what we now recognize as the shadow side of how we've acted in the world, that there can also be then a reunion with the whole in a way that participates in the greater joy of that evolving cosmic whole, and WHOLE, and and to do that freely out of this hard-won freedom as individuals and as a species that we're still in the process of realizing, that freedom can now be turned towards an act of love for the whole, uh, and again a kind of sacred marriage. Um, so that's my basic complexifying vision that I wanted to bring in. We have to recognize the fall, yes, that, but it wasn't just a wrong turn.
Yeah.
What was going on there? And we now are dealing with all the positive as well as the problematic consequences of that more complex evolutionary step that was taken over these years.
I think that's a really critical way of holding it, the gifts and the shadow aspects of what's come out of this journey. And, I really, in my own exploration of that shift, really respect a lot of Maria Gimbutas's work and the way in which, and other explorations of how it seems like in this larger evolution of consciousness that we go through as humanity, if you look at the precessional cycle and the yuga cycles, that we hit these times of cataclysm, particularly intense every 12,000 years, but also major times of earth changes and cataclysm every 6,000 years, and that preceded this shift into more of that sense of split between the earth and the sky and movement into transcendent spirituality. So, from my perspective, some of it seems to be trauma based.
As it
And
often
yet,
is, isn't it?
and
Yeah,
yet, as you said, out of that, we've had this experience of growth in our understanding of individuation in the positive sense, in the Jungian sense of being soul selves having a human experience and being able to explore our self-consciousness.
Yeah.
But we now need to heal, come back into balance, and reweave the understanding of transcendent spirituality and immanent spirituality, the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine, so that we can, like you said, claim the gifts of this journey, but not stay on this path of increasing imbalance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's well said. And I think we have yeah, you've put your finger on it, and I think we really have our work cut out for us because we're as I think of our time, it really is a kind of initiatory moment. It's a an initiatory rite of passage, as it were. And can humanity um, have the courage to go through and I'm saying humanity, but there's certain parts of the human community that are particularly running the show in terms of the executive functions and that have the power and that have the uh, resources and shape the worldview and so forth. I think we all can play a role, but there's no doubt. I mean, to to lay our crisis, the crisis of what's happening globally, on the residents of an African village or a South Pacific Islander population is kind of rather far-fetched when they had nothing to do with the Industrial Revolution and scientifically empowered technology or technologically empowered science and civilization that have reshaped the world in ways that we're now really having to grapple with. So I want to emphasize it's not quite true to say all of humanity is responsible for this. And there's gender issues, there's class issues, there's uh, north, south. I mean, there's
Mhm.
so many factors that are have played a role in this that so the distinctions of moral responsibility have to be uh, attended to. But that being said, certainly part of humanity has managed to bring the entire species as well as the entire planet into a global crisis that is requiring a profound revisioning of our who we are, what our relationship is to the whole. And since you are an astrologer and this is in part an astrological podcast, astrology is seems to be an unusually developed, evolved form of reconnecting with the soul of the cosmos and with the intelligence of the cosmos in such a way that can, I believe, play a very helpful role in navigating this rite of passage that we're going through.
And one of the things that you comment on that I think is so crucial is remembering the root meaning of the word psyche is soul, and that we need in our own individual development to as Jung would say, to reclaim that spiritual aspect of ourselves,
Yeah.
to reintegrate the soul with the personality self, to reintegrate our connection with the soul of the cosmos. And then you talk about the need to reweave spirituality and science and mythology. Do you think the Neptune Saturn conjunction is trying to guide us in how we can begin to reweave these things back together again, to reweave spirituality and the systems and structures with which we live our lives, Saturn, to reclaim that integration again?
That is one of the great potentials of that archetypal combination of Saturn and Neptune. And we're really going through that conjunction very strongly right now. But it's not only this year, but this year is a big one, over like uh, about a 3-year period. And there's because of the multivalence of the archetypes, the Saturn Neptune conjunction can also come through with like a great sense of discouragement and the spiritual dark night of the soul. That side is also very, very prominent, and dealing with um, crises of faith, for example. It's very typical for that Saturn Neptune combination. And at the same time, it can be the because Saturn can negate the transcendent, the spiritual, the vision of Neptune. Saturn can make one skeptical, or can make one so uh, feeling that you're having to deal with the problems of this imminent world, this life, and the difficult journey of the material existence, that it can um, it can make the connection with the whole Neptunian, all the Neptunian vision, the spiritual imagination, it can make it tenuous. It can that's why so many of the great skeptics had Saturn and Neptune in hard aspect. But Saturn can also relate to the great the that, as you say, with the practical kind of like structures of our lives, socioeconomic, etc. Um, while Neptune it's our ideals, our spiritual aspirations, and so forth. And so the Saturn Neptune conjunction can also be uh, recognized as an archetypal complex that is seeking to bring about a union, a reunion of those two that have been separated. Uh, and that's why you see so many of the great people like Martin Luther King or Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama, all of whom have Saturn and Neptune in major
Mm.
aspect, tight major aspect, and they really are focused on making the dream a reality, bringing compassion into the structures of human life, um, etc. And these two sides of the Saturn Neptune complex that I described, the more challenging dark night of the soul quality, or disillusionment. Think of Joni Mitchell with her Saturn square Neptune, with right in a T square with her moon and Venus, and how she writes, I see life and love from both sides now. It's where every dream comes true, every fairy tale comes true, where everything, but it's also when it doesn't work out, when the love turns cold, when all the clouds that got in my way. See, I can see the clouds as castles in the air, but I can also, but so many things I would have done if clouds had not gotten in my way, and they've so she's carrying that dialectic of Saturn and Neptune. Um, uh, and ending up in that song with, I really don't know love or life at all. That sense of not knowing.
Yeah.
Not knowing is another important expression of the Saturn Neptune aspect, like, and seeing the wisdom of not knowing, of
Being in the mystery.
being in the mystery. Yes, I remember a wonderful Jesuit Jungian named John Dourley, Dourley, a Canadian Jesuit. I remember once at a lecture here back in 1987, in a conference that the Jung Institute here in San Francisco put on, called Jung's Challenge to Christianity. And during his lecture, he said, we need to have a new altar to Our Lady of Perpetual Uncertainty. which I thought was just like spot on. Um, because
That's great.
if we embrace uncertainty, um, and not come to a try to come to a premature assertion of this is what's real, this is what's true, and I'm going to stake my life and yours on this dogma. If we can hold the state of doubt, of uncertainty, then much more is possible. One last thing about this. Oh, you were going to say something, and then I can
Well, I
add.
was just going to comment on that in that, in my study of cultural anthropology, the understanding of rites of passage, of really going through profound transformation, necessitates that you go through the death of what was, be in that liminal period of not knowing, too. And that's the time for transformation. That's the time for healing, when you're in the mystery, to
Yeah,
then move into the new form.
exactly. And that's why I'm always saying you cannot have a successful you can't know that the initiatory journey that you're on, the rite of passage, that you're going to be successful with it, or it will not. If you have a guaranteed you're going to success as a presupposition as you're going through it, it will not have moral power of
It won't
transformation.
happen.
Right. So that's why I say you can't
You can't
have a
control it.
yeah, you can't have a pretend near-death experience. Um, it's really got to take you by the throat, and that's where the rubber hits the road, and where the real spiritual change takes place. The one other thing I was going to say about that's the Saturn Neptune conjunction of our time is that um, it often it provides the opportunity for cultivating faith in the darkness. I think the the capacity to have faith even in the darkness, to retain hope even when one's all the empirical evidence might be encouraging you towards a totally negative assessment. That can only happen under such circumstances. If we lived in a time and a condition in which everything was, Beethoven's Ode to Joy was always playing, and the birds and the trees and everything was glorious, and people were living in total peace and harmony and celebrating. I mean, if it were always like that, you would never have any need to develop the kind of faith, radical faith and hope that, say, was expressed by a black preacher in Washington, D.C. in 1963, saying, "I've got a dream," when there was every reason to not think that dream was going to come true because of how oppressive, violently oppressive, so much of the country was towards his people, and yet he retained that hope. That takes a you have to have developed a kind of muscle to do that, and there's no need to develop that muscle if is no stress or tensions or obstacles in your way. And so that's a more hopeful way of regarding our very, very darkly challenging time.
Well, you talk about it also in your work as this is our journey of doing the inner work to be in that process of soul making and growing in our own maturity through the trials, through the stresses and traumas in our lives, as well as through the joys.
Yes,
But also, I think you're talking, Rick, about the importance in how we deal with these archetypal energies of planetary interactions that you talk a lot in your work about how we co-create with the cosmos, that we can choose our own level of, or work on our own level of consciousness around what aspect of those integration of energies that we operate from? Do we fall into the shadow aspects of the Neptune Saturn conjunction, or do we find the gift in it? But I also wonder, and I'd love your take on this. The planets have these archetypal meanings, and we have our myths and our stories that we experience them through that often are influenced by the cultural lens or the historical lens. And from my journey of exploring the processional cycle, it seems like there's often a certain filter in each age through which we perceive the planets, ourselves, our world. Do you think this is a time where we need to re-story our understanding of ourselves and to explore new meanings or myths related to the planets? Like, let
Yeah,
me let me just give you an example
sure.
because S- Saturn is a planet I'm really fascinated by because its meaning has morphed from in ancient Sumer, Saturn being Enki, the god of the sweet waters, who knows how to move between the worlds. And Saturn is, as a planet, less dense than water. But as we moved into Greek and Roman mythology, it started to be perceived as about density, limitation, mortality, constriction. Do we need to, as we're moving into these new paradigms and this new reweaving of our spirituality and our ensouled sense of the universe, to move into new myths and stories about the planets?
Um, I can't speak to the Sumerian myths about would have been Kronos in Greek and Saturn in Roman myth. The Saturn that I think not only developed in the Western astrological tradition over the last two or thousand plus years, but also has been part of the whole cultural imagination. James Hillman, I mean, you referred to soul making, that James Hillman, a great depth psychologist in the post-Jungian age, and he's now deceased, but it was Hillman who brought the term soul making into the conversation back in the early 1980s. And he drew that from a letter that John Keats, the poet, wrote in the early 1800s to his brother about that this world like a valley of soul making. Um, and what Keats had in mind was that through experience and through the pain and experience of our life's unfoldings, we are forging an identity, a soul's identity, that is who we really are. And well, even that very term soul making, Hillman's born with Saturn square Neptune, but that very term soul making, soul is very Neptunian kind of
Yeah, that's beautiful.
making, is a very Saturnian, tangible, constructive thing. Um, oh, yeah,
Bringing it into form.
right. So James Hillman wrote this brilliant essay about the rich multivalence of what we call in astrology the Saturn archetype or principle, the meaning of that planet, and it's in an essay called On Senex Consciousness, Senex. Senex is the Latin word for an old person, an old man, like senator, senile, senior, etc. Um, so on Senex consciousness, it's such a rich essay, and you can we reprinted it in the Archi Journal, ARCHI. If you look up archijournal.com, I believe you could probably access it for free there. I hope so. You can also find the essay in his book, Senex and Puer. Puer is the Latin word for um, young person or boy. So Senex and Puer, brilliant compilation of Hillman's essays on this, building on Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz's work on the senex and the puer, which in depth psychology are two important terms for understanding how we each have the eternal child in us and also the senex senior Saturnian side of us, the adult, the mature, etc., but also the constricting, but also the disciplining, the capacity for tradition, holding for fidelity, for enduring through time. All and so all that's in that essay carried very well. My point, though, is in relationship to the Saturn and Neptune, um, and and more generally, your point about is it time for us to um, tell new stories about these gods and goddesses or about these myths, tell new myths. Well, first of all, a genuine myth isn't something that we can just um, invent. They're revealed, they're disclosed. We participate in that disclosure. Our own moral evolution, our own capacity for self-awareness is going to play a role in what inspired um, myths may come through us. Each of us is also shaping that inspired story, narrative, myth that can emerge through us. We want to, and therefore, we as artists, as storytellers, um, as psychologists, as astrologers, we all have a responsibility to be doing our inner work so that we can be better transmitting vessels of the inspired new myths or whatever. So I'm wanting to emphasize that the myths are not just invented, they are they're disclosed, but that disclosure is shaped in part by our participation. Um, and then this is, I think, what Jung is getting at when he talks about that we are at a kairos moment, the right moment for a changing of the gods, as he put it, the changing of the fundamental principles and symbols that shape our civilization, and that the future of humanity and of the world depends on what new principles and fundamentals and symbols become dominant. Um, but as he said, this is not of our conscious choosing. This is happening to us. It's coming from the great unconscious, which is more than human. Um, it's an anima mundi. It's a soul of the world, even though we participate in it. And as he also says, does each individual know that he or she is the make weight that is going to shape that future? So there's all that. But I just want to put it in a word on behalf of the fact that the great okay, this is in line with your basic point about revisioning the myths, is that all the Greek and Roman, like Saturn Kronos, or Jupiter Zeus, or Venus Aphrodite, um, Neptune Poseidon, Pluto Hades. These are all um, mythic figures who existed in a profoundly patriarchal
Yeah.
pantheon and profoundly patriarchal culture and civilization. And that cannot help but also shape the astrological understanding of these. Uh,
Exactly.
and at the same time, good astrologers and good psychologically astute astrologers are aware that there's much more to each of these planetary principles than just what that patriarchal myth tells us about Uranus or Saturn or um, uh, Jupiter, Sun or Moon. And in fact, every person has like every planetary archetype has both a masculine and a feminine side. For example, Saturn can be both feminine or masculine. Um, the the womb is a positive Saturnian container that is protecting the developing embryo and fetus, the birth canal, the constricting, um, is in the great mother goddess and in every mother as she's giving birth, as is the expulsion from the womb, the expulsion from the garden, Saturn separating to make new life possible, to make a separate being possible out of the mother, and out of the original sort of primal unity. And so even Saturn, that most patriarchal of all planets, the very, the strict father of the pantheon, is also profoundly feminine in other forms that are experienced as both positive, all the positive sides of Saturn, like the protective, the the, the protective barrier, the safety, the security, the stability. And at the same time, and it's also that which brings into the material world as an actual separate being, but it also is the constriction, it's the separation, it's the expulsion, it's the suffering of birth, as well as the great result of it. So, and that's true of like Neptune. Yes, it's the Buddha consciousness and Christ and all that, but it's also the great womb of the mother goddess. It's the cosmic amniotic universe. It's etc. And same thing, Pluto. Yeah, Pluto's Hades and the Plutonic and that's very masculine, like for example, predatory, aggressive way. But it's also Kali. It's also Pele, the volcano goddess. It's also the Kundalini Shakti force,
Mm.
etc. It's the Medusa.
Yeah.
All these have every one of the planetary archetypes have both masculine and feminine forms, including sun and moon. There's a
Yes.
solar masculine and a lunar masculine. There's a solar feminine and a lunar feminine, etc. So I'm wanting to honor the fact that even within certainly late 20th century and early 21st century uh, astrological consciousness, there is a dawning awareness of the fact that what we have been working with all this time already is a richer archetypal understanding of the planetary meanings than just what the patriarchal myths of their names attached to their names might suggest.
Mm. Yeah, beautifully said. So before we stop, do you think part of this shift in the crisis of meaning and reconfiguring our understandings of ourselves, coming back into more of that connection with our soul selves and an ensouled cosmos, in terms of making meaning with the planets, is both reweaving these complexity of the archetypal meanings, but also reclaiming the shards of pre-patriarchal myths and stories
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
meanings,
Yeah.
reclaiming indigenous understandings,
Yeah.
but also, as Ian McGilchrist would say, moving from just our left brain ways of knowing and conceiving of these archetypes and energies back into more right brain ways of knowing, really honoring more our intuition and, from my perspective, honoring the consciousness of the planets that can communicate with us to
Yeah.
tell us who they are and how they can guide us in this time so that we're in those more shamanic ways, in those more ways of coming back into interconnectedness, allowing our own understandings to be reshaped in relationship with them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Ian McGilchrist, who I've been, you we became friends a few years ago, and you can see his big double volume of the most recent work up here.
Yes. Yes, I
Uh,
have it. It's amazing.
yeah, I've been working with his ideas there, and we did a conference with him here at CIS a year or two ago. Um, but yes, it's essential to not just see us as taking a step forward, but also a reclaiming of what has been marginalized or negated in the process of our evolution, our historical development, and so forth. And that's why the shamanic and the um, ancient wisdom traditions and indigenous tribal spiritual wisdom is uh, is so dear to so many of us now, and the practices are too. Why uh, ayahuasca ceremonies in South America are a recognized by many people as so important for their own psychospiritual growth, not just going to a psychiatrist to get medication of the more conventional psychiatric drug type, but to participate in a sacred medicine ceremony in which that has been going on for thousands of years and that may have actually a more profoundly healing effect than taking Prozac. So
Yes.
uh, that's yeah, I think that's why our age, or almost, I don't, in a way, a kind of cutting edge of the contemporary sensibility is feeling so close to the very distant past, and or to the what is still very present for indigenous peoples, many places, to reconnect with them and realize, like, what was just seen as inferiority and foolishness or illusion was in fact um, the illusion of the modern white European colonialist who just did not have ears to hear and eyes to see what these peoples were in touch with. And we lost contact with that at great cost to ourselves, but also to those peoples in quite tragic ways. And so there's a lot of healing that needs to be done, but also a kind of joy of reconnecting with what had been lost. So yeah, it's an I don't it's an illusion to think that it's just a step forward. It's a kind of spiral of moving forward and at the same time reconnecting with what was there in the past cycles, and when it gets to that part of the uh, journey around the zodiac, as you might say. So, okay.
Thank you. And thank you, Rick, for being in this conversation. And thank you for the program that you started at CIIS. As I was saying to you before we got on this recording, if I had to do my PhD over again, if it had existed when I got my PhD, that would be the program I would do because it is so integrative. You are weaving ancient wisdom and shamanic understanding and indigenous ways of knowing with our knowledge from these past thousands of years and integrating philosophy, cosmology, psychology. So
And archetypal astrology too.
yes.
There,
So
yeah.
thank you. Thank you for the way in which you're helping support this reweaving that we're in to be coming back into a deeper understanding of ourselves and what it means to be a part of this ensouled cosmos.
Well, thank you. You'll appreciate, by the way, among although I was kind of the central person founding it 30 plus years ago, early 90s. Um, it was there was a group of us who did it. Brian Swim, the cosmologist, and uh, uh, Robert McDermott. But another key person was Charlene Spretnak, who wrote one of the books that would be, I think, dear to your what you're
Yes.
talking about in terms of reclaiming the pre-patriarchalness. She wrote a book called Lost Goddesses Early Greece, Lost Goddesses of Ancient Greece. It's a title like that. That's a really fine book from, I think, the 1970s. And anyway, she was one of my colleagues that was also a co-founder, and um, Stan Groff in transpersonal psychology, psychedelic, and the synthesis with archetypal astrology that he and I taught for many years there, and it's now being carried forward by Becca Tarnas, who happens to be my daughter, but is quite brilliant person on her own terms and in lots of quite individuated ways. So anyway, it is a great program, and fortunately now it's online. So we have students from probably, as I say, about 100 doctoral and master's students from around the world now that can participate. They don't have to come to San Francisco as everyone had to in the past. I wanted to
A
give you a
great
little
program.
background about that history, so you knew that even someone who was part of the revisioning and reclaiming of the mythic traditions that you were speaking of was also part of the founding vision of the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program.
Well, I'll put links to that program below so that people can find more information about it. But thank you again for being in this conversation.
Thanks, Heather. You're wonderful to talk to, and yeah, I hope people find the conversation of value to them in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to all of you who are listening. Blessings and love to all of you.